Ain't it funny how we're 8 movies into this franchise and still not once have any of these games been referred to as Jigsaw puzzles? Just saying. Jigsaw is the first entry in the Saw franchise since 2010 after a long streak of 7 films that were released in all consecutive years. The first movie, I thought, was a decent psychological horror mystery, while most of its sequels seemed to masquerade as morality tales, but were really just torture porn for the lack of a better term. Saw 6 is the only one that I think came close to being pretty good. Yeah, the 6th film in the series is the best sequel. There's something you don't see every day. In this new entry, a group of young adults find themselves in a warehouse filled with death traps, with one of them getting killed off right away. The corpse of the first person suddenly appears in the city, and as the police investigate it, all of the evidence points to John Kramer, the serial killer known as Jigsaw, as the lone suspect. This is extremely startling, of course, because Kramer died in Part 3. I should probably start by giving fans of the series a heads up that this movie seems to ignore Saw 3D, the not-so-final chapter, because at the end of that movie, we learn that Dr. Gordon had been working for Kramer throughout the events of the sequels, and he was still alive at the end of it. He's nowhere in this movie, so I guess we're just supposed to assume that he was hunted down and executed. If the intention was to just ignore Saw 3D entirely, I'd be okay with that, because that was the installment that was in and of itself torture. So with the Spirig brothers on as new directors to this series, I wondered if they'd make any improvements with Jigsaw. And in a few areas, they certainly did. Most notably, the quick-cut fast motion that infested most of the previous movies is completely absent here, so thank you for that, Spirig brothers. The death traps are also not as outrageously over-the-top as Saw 3D, and it's a bit less gleeful with the gore. Although there are a few times where the movie will briefly cut to an earlier bit to remind us of something that was already established, as if it thinks we're too stupid to remember. Saw 6, I recall, also did that once near the beginning. Jigsaw is also slightly more believable than the last few sequels. If you think that this is another movie with a scheme that John Kramer planned with videos recorded with the puppet, and the plan is executed after his death, which in this case would be 10 years after, without giving anything away, I will tell you that that is not the case. And therefore, I can buy the story a bit more than like movies 5 through 7. But there are still other aspects where Jigsaw is about the same as most previous sequels. Whenever the main focus is on characters who are trapped inside a string of rooms and they have to suffer their way through them to survive, which if I'm not mistaken would be movies 2 and 5, can't believe I can distinguish them. Whenever that is the setting, the characters are never interesting at all. They just have one piece of dark backstory that is only an excuse for them to be in the scenario. Such is the case with Jigsaw. There's one character played by an actor named Paul Braunstein, and you may have seen in the trailers when the puppet appears and he remarks, "Well, that's not creepy at all." From that I thought, okay, maybe he'll provide some comic relief, which the other movies were pretty void of. But he wasn't. He was just another unsympathetic jerk, which there's always one of in these movies. Also, if you're hoping that this movie is going to take the series in a brand new direction, again, without giving anything away, it doesn't really. There are a few admittedly surprising twists in the third act, which once they happen you realize were pulled off through clever editing. But once you piece everything together, you find that it still amounts to a disappointingly similar result to most of the other sequels. So Jigsaw is one of the more watchable movies in this franchise. I'd even say it's probably third best. If you're a longtime fan, you'll probably enjoy it immensely, but for a movie that revives a series after 7 years, I expected a bigger improvement than in just a couple of superficial aspects. I'm going to give Jigsaw a 55%. That's a wrap. Thank you for watching. I hope you found this review helpful. Like if you liked, subscribe for more. This is Pop Culture. I'm Alex Pop.